a flawed human being. Well, welcome to the world. I mean, that's by definition who we are. We're fucking flawed. We're supposed to be.
Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. My name is Dr. D. Jaffe. I'm so happy to have you here with me today. I'm bringing you today a dear friend, Dee Stout. This woman has been instrumental in the harm reduction movement. She even wrote a book about it, which I love the title of this book, Coming to Harm Reduction, Kicking and Screaming. We're going to talk about some of the very non-traditional, unexpected ways in which Dee went from thinking about addiction the way most people think about it, and the way she was told to think about it, and more towards the side you've heard me talk about for many years here now, and how she wasn't really looking for it. She didn't even really want it. But then we get deeply into talking about families and the struggles of individuals who are told it's a black or white world. She talks a lot about the work she's done with individuals herself, and then some of the work that she's done in her own life to change the way she is. I've loved Dee for a number of years now. We've known each other through many meetings and interactions outside of the podcast. And so I always love bringing dear friends to you. And when it comes to this, especially if you know somebody who struggles with addiction or you struggle with it yourself, again, I want you to really just pay attention and listen to the messaging about how there's a completely different way to think regarding addiction. And once you shift to thinking that way about addiction, there are actually a whole slew of an endless number of options on how to get better, even if you're not perfect, because let's just be honest, who the hell is? I think you're going to love this interview. Dee's funny. She's amazing. We have a lot of fun. So I'm just going to take a quick break here, and I will see you on the other side. Hey guys, to be radically transparent, we drink mindfully.
Just like with the food we eat, we are extremely mindful of the drinks that we consume.
We also drink tons of delicious non-alcoholic drinks. You know, the max amount of drinks that I actually like mindfully enjoying on any given night is really 2. After that, I love sipping on something that's good, but doesn't have to be filled with alcohol.
Exactly. Same here. We honor what our bodies tell us, but we love a yummy cocktail. And that's why we absolutely love Damrak Gin. They are the first global gin brand to make both alcoholic and non-alcoholic versions of their gins with 17 botanicals included. Although it wasn't easy to create, their virgin gin tastes just like the real thing with carefully extracted flavors without losing their unique Damrak taste.
Damrak is an authentic Amsterdam gin brand. They pride themselves on being a true Amsterdammer, with their beverages being distilled right in the heart of Amsterdam.
I love Amsterdam.
Can we just go visit?
Yes.
They're proud but accessible, clever and genuine, and edgy but yet deep down smooth and charming, like me. So if you're going to hate me saying this, but it's damn tasty in a gin and tonic served with a slice of orange or 2.
Head to damrakgin.com and use the code IGNITED, IGNTD, all capital, for 10% off your order.
Go get it. I want to start out. The reason I wanted to have this conversation is what I love about your story so much, Dee, is that typically when people first get introduced to this, I'll call it just any non-traditional approach. The first response they have is, well, why do you need that? Don't they have that like AA thing? And I feel like that's always the response. So even it doesn't have to be as radical as my concept of non-abstinence as an option. It doesn't have to be as radical as harm reduction. It doesn't have to be radical really in any way. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people say like, oh, I thought we solved that problem. Mm-hmm. And from the first time I met you, but also in the book you wrote, and we'll talk about that more, right? You tell so much of the story of starting out in that traditional world, which is all there was, or all that is obvious that there is. And eventually not only, I mean, you talked about it, kicking and screaming, not only finding a different route for yourself, but then also moving professionally to a different route. And I'd love for you to walk people through that, because I think it's hard for somebody to truly understand the gap between where you started and where you are now without hearing that story.
It's hard for me to remember it, to tell you the truth. I was talking about this recently with somebody, and I started laughing in the middle, and they were like, what did I say something? And I said, no, I'm just kind of remembering what just came out of my mouth and how that would have shocked me. In fact, it probably would have pissed me off 20 years ago. And I would have been in a battle with myself. And I kind of was in a battle with myself. When I entered the field, I did it the quote unquote traditional way, right? That a lot of us wind up here. I went to treatment. And when I was in treatment, I was in a residential hospital-based abstinence 12-step oriented program that still exists here in Oakland, California. And when I got ready to leave, they told me, if you could keep your nose clean, literally in my case, because that was one of my big drugs, you'd make a really good counselor. And I thought about that, and psychology was something that had always been in my horizon. Mostly because I wanted to be able to go back and tell the son of a bitch psychiatrist that had misdiagnosed me as a teenager that nearly got me locked up and caused me to divorce my parents legally, and which my family has never healed from. And I just wanted to say, there you go, you son of a bitch, how dare you? And look at what you did to my life. Still remember his name too. I won't go into that. It's interesting how those little things just stick with you,
Oh yeah.
So I got into this hospital-based treatment. I found out, and I even use this expression with some of my clients today, that I discovered, which I think many of us do that go to residential treatment, that the scary place is really not in treatment. So we kind of spend the first couple of weeks bitching and pushing and fighting, not wanting to be in there. And then we figure out, oh, geez, I got to go back into the world. How do I do that? That is the scary place.
Yeah.
So I volunteered the next day and turned right around and drove back to Oakland, and I kept going, and I never left for about a decade.
Wow.
I also got a job within 9 months, absolutely insane, as the women's director for 4 women's recovery homes for this so-called Christian organization. It was like, whatever. They just sort of called themselves that, frankly, and discovered some really inappropriate behavior going on. I also discovered that I needed more skills. I could not just be a person in recovery, quote unquote, with a couple years of education, not even drug-related education, and think I could work in this field with very complicated people. Yeah. And I started immediately to see the unethical behavior that sadly still goes on in our field.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Right. And I've been in this field long enough now and worked in enough places that I've been there when people have died by suicide on numerous occasions. I have been there when people have been taken out, the CEO in handcuffs. People have been arrested for insurance fraud. I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
Just too many stories.
Yeah.
And so one of my big pushes in moving to harm reduction was to move away from that, move away from all of it. Because as someone with a long trauma history of my own, it just pissed me off. And not just as a woman, as a human being. And I figure if I went through that, and I know what a lot of drug users have gone through, male, female, whatever, let alone you add into that religion, race, all of these other parameters on top of it. There's a lot of trauma out there.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's no wonder we're using drugs.
Mm. Yeah, and it's no wonder that people are having such a hard time meeting this kind of like success criteria that we've created.
Yeah.
Mostly because those of us who are not struggling, and I'm putting myself in that camp now because I've struggled a lot less than I used to. But, you know, these criteria are created by the people who aren't struggling as a mark by which the people who are struggling need to prove to everybody else that they're doing well. And I think that whole equation has to be flipped, right? Like if you go to the doctor, they ask you what your pain level is, and they show you a little chart, and you pick, and they just kind of buy it. And in addiction, somehow we've come to this place where you ask people what they're struggling with, you go, no, that's not why you're struggling. You're an addict.
Right.
You're an alcoholic. And you learn pretty quickly, probably like my children learn, that you can't fight the you don't get to watch your iPad right now rule, because it's going to be enforced. You learn, well, these are the rules, so I'd better follow them. And then we wonder why nobody gets better. Where in a field where we're supposed to help people, we're actually just making them pretend that they're fine so they can fit in boxes so we can release them back into the wild, which, as you mentioned, is oftentimes really, really the scary part for them. You talked about harm reduction. I want to talk about that a little bit. You know, there was a moment for me for sure in my professional work, and it came pretty early, where I went, oh, I can't do this. And I remember it was a kid, early 20s, in my young adult group at Matrix. And he had come in for opiates and was injecting heroin, but pills was his main thing at the time. And we did randomized testing, but it was kind of funny randomized testing, because I would test half the group on one day and half on the other. And I would try to kind of mix it up, but essentially everybody knew they weren't getting tested on any given day. So a lot of them would gamble with it. And this kid got caught a few times with THC in his system. And the first time they let me keep him in. Second time they kind of had me really giving him a talking to. And the third time they asked me to let him go. And I said, can we just, like, why are we letting this kid go? And they said, well, you know, you've talked to him multiple times. It's an abstinence-based program, and he's using cannabis, and it doesn't look like he's going to be able to stop, or like he's stopping. Like I said, yeah, but he came in for heroin. And I go, are we really making the judgment that it's better that he go out there and have no care because he's smoking weed than it is for him to be in treatment, getting help, staying off of opiates, but smoking weed? Like, how does that judgment make sense to somebody? And, you know, I actually liked my mentor there, my supervisor, Janice, quite a bit, but she said, yeah, that's the rules here. We have to follow the rules. And I said, I hate these rules. These rules suck. So I did it because I had to, because I was one of the employees there. But from that moment on, I was looking for a way out. It's like, this is insane. It's insane to me that you would take somebody addicted to heroin and kick them out of treatment because they smoked weed. I'm not even saying that smoking weed is harmless and they should keep smoking weed for the rest of their lives. I'm saying, if you give me the choice between any one of my clients smoking weed today or shooting up heroin, odds are I'm going to go on the side of weed. And the fact that either they couldn't see it or they couldn't bend the rules enough to allow for it made me realize there's got to be another way. And that's when I started digging into harm reduction. That's when I found Mark and a lot of that world. So were there specific events in your experience where you went, oh, I can't do this?
Yeah, there were. I mean, the first one, let's do the short version here too. I had been working at the hospital for about 7.5 years, something like that. And a little bit of my lineage. So my sponsor, my longtime sponsor in AA, wrote one of the chapters of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and his sponsor had been Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA.
Oh, yeah.
Doc Earl is his name. He's long dead now. His chapter, by the way, if anybody wants to know the story, is called Physician Heal Thyself. He was the head of the OBGYN department at UCSF here in San Francisco. And just a crazy man who I adored. He had been in the original Kinsey studies, watching people have sex back there in Indiana for Kinsey. So he was just this wild guy who, and his wife had a PhD in human sexuality, which is another area of mine. So we all kind of came together, and they did lectures at the treatment facility, which is how I met them. I went to both of them one time and said, I don't think I can do this. And I was getting my graduate degree at that point. I was kind of in the middle of my graduate process, and they were both on my committee originally. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm getting sick because I'm arguing with patients every day. And it's like beating my head up against the brick wall. My psychiatrist got so concerned for my well-being that he insisted I go out on stress leave.
Wow.
You know, we don't go out on stress leave. I'm sorry. I'm from the Midwest. You don't do that.
Get out there and shovel the snow.
Exactly. You know, you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you move along. Right? You know, and so I argued with him for a while. And what he discovered was within about 3 weeks, we had cut my meds in half, and I was on quite a few psych meds at that point. That was a whole issue. And he looked at me and said, your work is making you sick. You got to make a choice there. And I went to Earl and Mickey and said, I think I need to leave. And I also need to leave AA.
Oh, you realized both of them at once.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll never forget, he said, that's okay, baby. He's the only one who got to call me baby. You know, it'll be here if you want to come back. And if you don't, you know, you're not supposed to spend your whole life here.
This is Earl.
Yeah.
Wow, that's an insightful sponsor.
Yeah. And, you know, go on out there. This is about living your life. And I slowly made the transition out of AA. During that period, you couldn't talk about psychiatric medications. You know, those weren't allowed in treatment. All right. We think buprenorphine and Suboxone and those things, you know, treatment has a problem with that. I mean, most of them will now take psychiatric medications. You know, they'll dispense them and they'll allow people to be on them. You know, there's that word, allow people.
Allow.
I know.
I love that.
But that was the terminology, right?
Yeah,
you know, it still is in a lot of places. And I just got pissed off one time. I was doing a talk, you know, at a big meeting. And I said, you know, if you're going to get pissed off because I'm going to talk about psychiatric medications and I'm going to also talk about drug use, because that's who I am. And you might as well get up and walk out now. And I'll tell you, a few people did. Yeah. I said, okay, there you go.
I've had people walk out of talks, and it's, you know what, you can almost tell, almost nobody does it now. But yeah, when I started, and I would talk about deep harm reduction and really, you know, when you say meeting the client where they're at, what are you actually talking about? Like, I had this graph, and I was like, you know, meeting the client where they're at is not going over there, beating them over the head and then dragging them over to your side of the street. That's not meeting the client where they're at. And so some people would laugh, but some people would get really mad at me. So it was, for you, it was a combination. Like you were starting to suffer from having these discussions with your clients. And then you realize in one fell swoop that if you can't have these conversations with your clients, or these fights really with your clients, that means you also have to change your own recovery.
Right. And then I had clients in my private practice who, my favorite story is, I was getting ready to get trained in motivational interviewing in New Mexico with Bill Miller and the crew there. And I was applying because it was a NIDA grant that Bill had gotten to do this. So I'm applying, and you have to send in a tape of a session. Yeah. And it was my last opportunity because I found out about this late in the game. So I only had a couple of weeks to pull it all together. And I had a client that I had seen in treatment he had been in a recovery home in San Francisco. I was the family person there for several years. And so I knew his wife, and they came to me after he left the recovery home to do sort of couples work, that sort of thing. But occasionally they came in alone because somebody had a commitment or they were sick or something like that. Well, this time he had what we would call a relapse. He had lapsed back, and he was a IV heroin user when he used. And he called me, and he was, just out of it. It says, I don't think you want me to come in. And I said, man, and I had told him, we had agreed I was going to record him to send in. I said, I really need you to come in because you're my last client. I mean, this is it. I won't be able to go. Do you think you can make it? And he was like, yeah, of course I'd do that for you. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about, So he came in, ate. I used to keep a jar of jelly beans on the table, went through them all,
my God.
Passed out numerous times during this event, nodded off, right? And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be the worst session ever, but I got to send it. We'll just see what happens.
Yeah.
Now, to finish this story about my client. So he also happened to be a member of my church at the time. And so I said, okay, so at the end of the session, I can't let you just get in your car and drive you home. I'm not okay with that. So I'm going to take off my counselor hat and I'm going to put on the church member hat and friend, and I'm going to take you home. We're going to call your wife, let her know, you're okay, and I'm going to drive you. And he was fine with that. Within the month, I'm going to say it was about 2 weeks later, I get a call from him asking me to drive him to treatment, residential treatment. So why are you asking me to do that? And he said, because you're the only person who ever listened to me when I was loaded and didn't judge me.
Oh,
that did it, Addie.
That's it. Oh, I love it.
I still get goosebumps, honestly.
I'm getting goosebumps, and I wasn't there. And we're getting a little into kind of like the professional jargon and stuff like that. So I want to really whittle this down to the people listening. And it's so much of what you said right now, and people don't understand this, goes completely counter to the entire way that the addiction treatment field works.
Yeah.
I just want to break this down for people, and we can go
please.
tangent for a while, right? So
because I was struggling with this too. Remember that, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And so it's like, just think of the things that make it in the addiction treatment field, right? Like the show Intervention that everybody loves so much. So let's just think about the way that intervention, the world of addiction gets portrayed in the world normally.
Yep.
The show Intervention.
Emmy award winning, we might add.
Emmy award winning. So in the show Intervention, the whole thing is essentially setting up somebody who's using drugs. Now, by the way, I've been on the other side of the reality TV show. Even that's fake, but I'll explain in what sick and perverted ways it can be fake sometimes. So it's about setting up a person to believe that one thing is happening, like maybe we're doing a story on drug users or whatever. But in reality, their entire family and everybody they know is planning to ambush them and take them into treatment. And in the moment that happens, everybody's going to confront them with everything they've done wrong while the cameras are on them, while the whole world is watching. Essentially, their worst nightmare is going to happen in a moment. And the idea is to strip them down to the core, right? And so that they have no choice but to say, you know what? Okay, I'll go. I'll do the thing I don't want to do. That's one version. The other version, whether it's 28 Days, a Sandra Bullock movie, or any of those kinds of things, it's like this jail-like experience of rehab where you go and you get trapped against your will. And that's the idea that we have in our head over and over. And it gets reinforced by media and stories and the idea of who alcoholics, quote unquote, and addicts, quote unquote, are. And so everybody just believes it because that's what you see. Right. Just like you grow up and you see Disney stories about princesses meeting their princes and living happily ever after. And so you grow up believing, oh, that's what's going to happen to me. I'm going to meet a princess and we're going to live happily ever after. I don't know what happens happily ever after. Nobody talks about that. But we believe the stories that we get told. People believe this is what addiction and recovery is like. Addicts don't care. You can't count on them. They're liars. Everything they tell you is bullshit. When they're high, you can't even reason with them. Don't trust the word that comes out of their mouth. They're unmotivated. They're sloppy. et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And the tools that you and I believe in and use on a daily basis, and this story that you were just telling about this person addicted to heroin that you had mentioned, we try to throw almost all of that away and say, okay, what I'm dealing with is a person in front of me. The only thing I have to go on is the relationship that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And if I believe them to be good hearted, good natured, capable people who are really trying to survive and do the best they can in this world, and if I approach them in that way, then maybe we get to have the kind of relationship where they can talk to me about what's actually bothering them, and they can explain why this behavior, which they know is hurting them, makes sense. And together, maybe we can dig out some solution to this thing that oftentimes, by the time we get involved, we're talking decades of struggles.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Bill Miller and motivational interviewing. Bill Miller came up with this really radical concept, which was, hey, don't fight with your clients. Instead of fighting with them, talk to them and try to elicit why they want to change. And once you find the reasons internally why they want to create change, just focus on that. Just focus on their change talk. Focus on, oh, so you're fighting with your wife a lot around your drinking and you hate the fighting. Man, I wonder if anything could help with that. Like, be an ally to them in a way that reinforces what they want, not what you want. And then sort of walk that path with them, right? Rolling with resistance, exaggerating or showcasing ambivalence, and all these concepts that are almost the exact opposite of what happens in the field. And the story you told about this client is that simply by allowing him, and you did it because you had a need in the moment, but you saw that simply by allowing this person to sit on a couch and eat jelly beans while they're high and then talk about what's really going on, they developed such a trust and such a relationship with you while high, while quote unquote screwing up, while being incapable, all that stuff, that without you doing much more over the next couple of weeks, they came to a decision that they don't want to live the way they live anymore.
Yeah.
And they want to create change.
And I could add that last I knew, they had gone on to, he and his wife had another child, and he was in the seminary studying to be a minister.
This just speaks to me so much about, when I talk now, when I give talks, I say, look, what we're doing isn't working. It's broken. The system is dysfunctional. We have to stop it. And most of the professionals now at least understand something is going on. But a decade and 15 years ago, people looked at us like we were insane. And there are a lot of people before it was Stanton Peele and Bill Miller that you'd mentioned, and Alan Marlett, and a lot of people who came before us, right? And actually, my old partner Mark Kern, like a lot of people who had been doing this for, since the 80s, in a really deliberate way, and they helped pave the road. But we need a wholesale change.
Yeah, well, and that's the point. It's about a culture shift, right? And I mean, that's going back to my book. That was the point of the book. That is the point of the book. That's the point of the next book. Because I'm a big believer in stories. That my lecturing to you, because that's essentially a textbook, right? I'm going to tell you what you should be doing. That, I suppose we have to have them in some ways to meet the WASC officials that are going to certify our school and that sort of shit. But I teach graduate students. I teach the next generation of therapists, ironically. And, so I have a textbook, but that isn't really how you're going to change culture. I like to teach in a seminar style. So you bring your experiences, your lived experiences. I'm going to bring what I know about the field and my own professional and personal experiences, and we're going to throw it all in the middle and stir it up and see what comes out of it. And let's see what we can come up with. And, so stories are what I know actually helps people to think differently, to consider another perspective or another option. and then to start making those small ripples in the water, in those oceans that we need to make change.
I love that.
Ultimately.
I love that analogy. There's that quintessential self-help, self-development perspective that by the way, I ascribe to, so I'm not putting it down at all, but that is, nothing is possible until somebody gets it done. And then all of a sudden everybody knows that it's possible and it completely changes. And one of the examples I go to, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but in case people listening haven't, right, is that the 4-minute mile example that you hear in a lot of self-improvement talks. And it's hard for us to remember this time now, but there was a time when the idea was people cannot break the 4-minute mile. When I say people cannot, what I mean is the belief was that physiologically, biologically, man, the bone structure and the tendons and the weight and the fact that we went from being 4-legged to 2-legged and all these changes in our evolution made us slower, and that due to that, there was just this block, almost like the sound barrier is a specific kind of block. There was a barrier to human movement, and people just couldn't break the 4-minute mile. And the medical field bought it, track and field athletes, like everybody just understood that's the line. This, I don't want to butcher the name, so I'll just kind of talk about it. In 1954, a guy by the name of Roger Bannister was 25 years old and ran a 3:59.4 minute mile. And it had never been done before. Nobody had done it. And literally within months, a few other people had broken the record. And in 65 years since, it'd been lowered by 17 seconds, and hundreds, if not thousands of people had broken that record. And the reason that it's relevant to our discussion, even though it has nothing to do with addiction. Oh yeah, it does. Is what people have to understand is, and we see this over and over, and we see it in history, but it's hard for us every time to remember it again. The way we see things right now is limited by our perspective and our beliefs. And the moment those beliefs change, a lot of the limitations lift. Do all of them lift? I don't know. I don't know if they all lift, but a lot of them lift. Well, go ahead. I'm just going to say it's an evolution, right? I mean, you have to start from someplace, just like we say, come as you are, start where the person is. Well, that's true for us in our field as well. So we start from where we are. Now, personally, I'd like to blow up most of treatment, but that is not going to happen. So, I can no longer work in it. I don't think my ego can stand getting fired one more time. But I don't regret it because every single time it was in the course of supporting a client and a client's need. And I will do that always. And that's the point. So there's some of us that get to, somebody I mentor likes to say, thank you for taking the risks, because now I won't need to take as many. Or at least they'll be different. We'll see, right? Yeah. But so some of the things I'd like to put them out here, right? This is a recovery-based podcast, and I'd like to put some of the things that we're suggesting out there. You already mentioned one. It is okay to work with a client while they're intoxicated. Yeah. Totally fine. I mean, I want people. I'm privileged when people come in loaded, right? Yeah. I mean, when I finally got that through my head, that is, you're saying, I trust you enough to show you who I really am in this moment. Because if we understand that people are using as a coping mechanism, not because they're, as you said earlier, because they're a drug addict or an alcoholic or whatever label we want to throw on them. No, they are using for reasons. And our job is just to help them find those reasons so we can beat it. Yeah, totally. That's right. So it's just, all I need to do is just see you, right? And be okay with what I'm seeing. Yeah. A flawed human being. Well, welcome to the world. I mean, that's by definition who we are. We're fucking flawed. We're supposed to be. So I like to tell my students occasionally my humanness is going to show, meaning I fucked up. Okay. Okay. So where do we go from here? Sorry about that. Another one that I love, and you and I think do this pretty consistently, and I screw it up every once in a while, like everybody does everything. But, people who struggle with drugs and alcohol are not alcoholics and addicts. There's nothing like, they're not separate kinds of people. They're not a different species. They don't belong in a different category. And people, when I say this a lot of times, people say, well, why not call a spade a spade? First of all, you should really research the back of that phrase before you use it again.
Yeah.
And secondly, I want everybody to pause for a second and think about racial epithets and LGBTQ words that you used to use in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Look, I'm Jewish, so I can actually say, I'm actually allowed to say this word. I was thinking about this on my walk today. Like, people call me a Jew pretty regularly, and at least that's an identifier. I don't love it because it defines me by this one thing, but it's at least an identifier. But the word that a lot of these things that I'm mentioning relate to is like kike. That's the word. I've never
understood that, I have to say.
I don't know the origin, but like my family comes from Poland and Germany and Russia, and that was a big word. Kike was a big word, and so
absolutely.
If somebody called me that, I would look at them sideways and go, "I'm sorry, what?" And to me, calling a person who struggles with alcohol issues an alcoholic is like calling somebody who's of the Jewish faith a kike. Like, it's the same thing. So now you're just gonna give me a name, and people look at me like I'm crazy when I say this. I swear there will be a time where we couldn't fathom turning to somebody who struggles. Oh, so you're an alcoholic, and say that to them. I think we will end up reaching that place as well.
I hope so.
What do you use in terms of language so people know kind of what's available?
Yeah, I struggle with it because, and I try to say, it depends on where I am. So it depends on context. If I'm on a podcast, and I do a bunch of these and different events and talks, like I know you do too, and I'll use things like addict, or I may use addiction, for instance. I try to balance that with other words of substance use disorders or people who are struggling with their drug use, that sort of thing. I'm a little more flexible because we've come to have some common language, and I want people to understand what I'm talking about. Yeah. However, I also want to challenge them a little bit, like you just did, in saying, maybe we could rethink this. And I want to keep bringing that up while not forcing people to say, you can't ever say that, right? And start shaming them.
And by the way, like, people get to call themselves whatever they want.
Absolutely.
I'm talking about me calling other people something, right?
Yeah, exactly. But in the classroom, that's different. So when I taught, and I've taught for 25, 30 years now, and I taught for a long time in San Francisco for an AOD, alcohol and other drugs certification program. And a lot of folks are in their own substance recovery who entered the field like we have, right? And so they would come in and say things like clean and sober. And I'd say, that's fine if you want to say that right here. I don't ever want to see that in your case notes that you're writing up for this client.
Thank you for bringing that word up, clean.
No,
that's a really big thing to bring up, clean. It's like, again, we don't think about it, but the idea, like, let's close our eyes for a second and recognize somebody is really struggling in life. They're having some of the worst times they've ever had, and they're relying on alcohol, drugs, pills, whatever, and make whatever judgments you want, but that's just their reality, right? You kind of have to accept their reality. It's their reality right now. And then on top of that, they now have to accept that they're dirty.
Yeah.
So not only are they having one of the worst times in their lives ever, but now they're also dirty. And and whether you say that they're dirty or not, by saying that the other people are clean, you make the very clear distinction. And I think that's so important.
Yeah. I do too. And I know that a lot of people get irritated with me when I challenge that in the classroom. I say, well, that's fine. You can get irritated, and I better not see those words, because they're not accurate, number one, and they're not professional. Yeah. So you don't get to bring your lingo into the profession when we're writing case notes about people that are going to possibly follow them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And I think this speaks, so, obviously in my book, Abstinence Myth, we talk about harm reduction quite a bit here, but this idea of slip-ups and relapses as as sort of markers of failure, I think is another
Yeah.
big part of the work that we do that is very, very different. And the
Yeah.
word clean, dirty, and there's also, you can kind of throw it in because it's not like you were a
Yeah.
different human being. If you had a drink last week and you had some time sober beforehand, you didn't get dirty in the process. And I think the thing that I was writing up for myself as I wanted us to bring this up
Mm-hmm.
again, the delineation that there's the right and the wrong way to do this in some way. And the
Mm-hmm.
equation, the analogy I give people a lot is, you would never in your life imagine a psychotherapist to have a client come in and have the therapist say to them, look, we've been working together for a while and I really do want to work with you. You seemed very serious about working on your depression when you first came in, but we made an agreement that you would stop being depressed when we would work
Mm-hmm.
together. And, we've been working together for a year and you've dirtied up on that depression like 3 or 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
I know at least 3 or 4 times for sure you got depressed while we've been working. And you said you weren't one time, but I know you were. And so I'm going to have to terminate treatment. I just can't see. Like, it's hard for me to even make up the scenario as I say it because it sounds ridiculous. It sounds wildly inappropriate,
Well,
but it happens in
and
the field all the time.
that's right. So one of the things that got my attention was Pat Denning's first book, Harm Reduction Psychotherapy. And there's a piece in there, and I'm going to paraphrase, but she says, why is it that addiction is the only mental health condition for which you're not allowed to have the symptoms of it before you can get treatment? And I had never looked at it that way. And that was back in 2000. So 2000, 2001, sort of, well, from about 1998 to about 2002 were my years of stretching. And I trained several times. I went to Chicago and trained with Scott Miller, no relation to Bill Miller in Albuquerque. But I would leave his trainings and say, you make my head hurt. But there was something that I knew that was true about what he was saying. So it was little things like, for instance, and I met Alan Marlette because my background was in relapse prevention. That's what I really got interested in. And I worked with those folks, the chronic relapser, as we like to call them, right?
Which is like, for everybody who's listening right now,
oh, Lord.
if you think being called an alcoholic is bad, it's like,
yeah.
You're like the pariah of the alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
The alcoholics look down at you if you're a chronic relapser.
You're not supposed to hang around with those folks, whether you're in 12-step or, God forbid, treatment. I mean, we would say, that's hanging with the losers.
Which proves one more time that shame somebody. And the first thing they're going to look to do is to shame somebody else more so that they can feel superior somehow, right? Like, it's almost like, oh, you think I'm a piece of shit?
Yeah. Wait till you see Jennifer. This. Yeah.
Jennifer really sucks.
Yeah.
I'm not as bad as Jennifer, right? Like, and then from that, maybe like now there's the junkies or like you just have to create continuous labels until somebody like the last little rat in the corner that everybody in the universe looks down at. And that's it's human nature to some extent, but I think it's our job as helpers to recognize that and pull everybody out of it because it's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's so harmful and it's toxic for everybody,
including
right? The person who's doing the shaming and the person who's getting shamed. I think that's the other thing that we really need to recognize. 100%. Just like the treatment as usual is killing us, the workers, just as much as it's harmful for people that we're trying to help, quote unquote. I mean, it did for me. That's what got me out ultimately.
When I train coaches now, I tell them all the time, I said, look, there's going to be times that you're stressed out because the client's not doing as well as you want them to, or they're not following orders. We're all humans. Like you're not that important. You're not that crucial in this equation. Take care of yourself so you can keep doing the work, but do not believe for a moment that if you magically arrange the universe in a specific way, all your clients will all of a sudden be great.
Yeah. So the chronic relapsers here, right? That's a group of people that were really close to my heart. Yeah. And I just saw so much pain and anguish in that. And there were so many rules and regulations around it. All it did was add more shame, right? As you were talking about, that either they're the losers, so none of us are supposed to be around them, which by the way is nowhere in the big book of AA. In fact, it says quite the opposite. But that's, sorry folks, but that's because my book goes into the history of AA and where all the harm reduction actually is, because it is there. So whatever this is today is not what the founders imagined. And it's also just, when we look at the shame, it's also shamed by the providers. So I remember working for Kaiser, and in the copy room, which is where we kept all the charts and all the stuff, the staff area, there was a list, and I'm trying to think of what they called it, and I'm going blank, but there was a list. Oh, frequent flyers. That's the term. There was a list, and those people that made it onto this list and their patients, right, were not allowed services.
Oh my gosh.
Because they had utilized services too often.
Yeah.
I mean,
you don't want the people who really need the help to get
right. The help. It's like, oh my God. I remember seeing it taped up onto the cupboard wall and thinking, what are we doing?
And by the way, that I think that's also a sign of a very American thing, if I can, and that is, I'm always reminded of this Cadillac Super Bowl commercial when I see this. Maybe we'll post a link to it on the show notes here, because I used to give a talk on happiness, and I started it off with this Super Bowl ad that I almost really feel like I want to pause and show it to people right now. When we do the video version of this, let's do that. We'll pause and show it to them. It's essentially a Cadillac commercial where a man who looks like he's very successful and is just killing it in business walks around, puts on a suit, and talks about how Americans are winners. We never quit. We don't take breaks. We don't take care of ourselves. Everybody else takes breaks, but we fly to the moon, leave the keys there because we're the only ones coming back, and we kick ass. And I was just thinking to myself, by the way, nothing wrong with that if that's actually the way you want to live and function. A ton wrong with it if you decide that everybody who doesn't want to live that way is a loser and should be shot on sight, and sort of look down at them. And what I realized when I first watched that commercial was that it epitomized that American sentiment that if you're not at the top, you don't even count. And so part of the reason why sick people, especially around mental health, are relegated to second, third, fourth class citizen, and why our healthcare is terrible and the most expensive and the hardest to access. And I don't mean terrible in terms of its quality. If you have a ton of money, it's great, but you better be fully employed and have a ton of money, because otherwise you're screwed and you're going to declare bankruptcy if you break your arm. Is because we sort of, America in general kind of looks at people who are not at top of their game as dispendable, as expendable. I mean, sorry. I look at people who are not at the top of their game as expendable. And the people that we work with, those who struggle with alcohol, drugs, who've had severe trauma in their life, or just they're having a bad run, are looked at as the throwaway, literally. And so from that perspective,
because they did something wrong.
Yeah, they chose to do something wrong too.
I mean,
yeah. So everything else flows from that, I think.
Yeah, and that's, I've gotten that from my family, not my son, thank God, but but my family of origin, as I like to, the family that we choose and the family that we just wind up in, right? But very much that. That you're wherever you are because of all those decisions you made, and you could have made other decisions.
Yeah, which by the way is also true. It's just that's I wrote an article once, I think, on this. Again, maybe we'll find the link for it. But it's what frustrates me about that way of seeing things is it's true, but it oversimplifies what a choice actually means.
Right. Well, and I like to differentiate. Excuse me for interrupting, Addie, between decision and choice.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we talk about choice means you have options.
Exactly. That's exactly
more many, right? Yeah. Decision means maybe I have a couple. I'm not really thrilled with either of them. And so I just decide to do this, right?
Yeah,
go
and
ahead.
we do have to commit, even when we make good quote unquote choices, we have to end up deciding so that we can
Yeah.
follow through and sort of cut away the other options.
Yeah.
But I think when people say you had choices, they assume that your circumstances and their circumstances were the same when
There
those
you go.
choices came up. So
Yep.
for instance, and I will fully acknowledge privilege in this situation.
Yep. Just think of that. Yeah.
When I was in jail, I had a choice of, having bail and going to rehab and having my dad come visit me every month in rehab and go to court with me every month when I had to go to court. Now I could have decided to screw all that up and do a lot of other, I did have other things I could have done, but there was also the choice to accept the help from my parents and accept all that and take the resources.
Yeah.
It is a complete falsehood that everybody has that choice.
Yes.
And when I was a young, anxious kid and somebody gave me a bottle of vodka, of course, I technically had the choice to not drink it. But what the choice that it seemed to me was happening in the moment was I can be the weird, awkward kid and then not do the thing they're asking me to do, which would make me more the weird, awkward kid, or I could just be like everybody else. That seemed to be the choice in front of me in the moment. And I chose to be the better liked version of self. And so I think, you talked about empathy earlier and the connection that it creates to the people we work with. I think one of the biggest jobs we get to do, and I love doing it, is doesn't matter what my experience would have been in that person's life. What matters is what was their experience. And what I found, I've definitely talked to and been in rooms with more than 1,000 people that I was somehow involved in the care for by now. And I can say this with certainty. Every time, if I actually take the right amount of attention and focus and notice and listen to the story of the person sitting in front of me and really connect to their experience in the moment, I have a pretty clear understanding of why they ended up in front of me. And it all makes sense. And the only time that it doesn't is when I'm trying to project, oh, well, you should have done this, or why didn't you do that? And then what I'm realizing more and more in my professional life is that's me trying to interject myself and my family experience, my culture, my learning onto theirs. And that just doesn't work.
Right. There's one of my mentors was on faculty in school outside of Chicago University. Jane Peller is her name. She's a social worker. And she was partnered with Scott Miller for a number of years. And when she trained us, she said, if you're going to be successful with somebody, you have to find something to appreciate in each one of your clients. And I always like that. And she said, you know what, you're human and you're not going to be able to do that. And so that means you also need to be able to refer them out when what we would call our countertransference, right, gets so strong that we're no longer going to be of service to this person because all I can see is through those eyes of my family, my experience, my background, whatever that is. And that can happen to anybody, right?
Oh, so, I love that. Yeah. I love that.
And to me, that's part of harm reduction too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. When I do professionals training, I say, look, if you've got a client and you don't believe they can get better, you need to let somebody else take care of them. You will not be able to help them. If you don't believe they can do it, you will not be the person to help them do it.
That's right. Even while holding that not everyone is going to get better.
Of course.
Right? Of course. It's like, yes, that's called critical thinking, holding two opposing ideas in your head at the same time. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, we can do that. It's like that 4-minute mile.
Yeah. And by the way, that's happened to me. I've met with clients before that I have to go, I'm not going to be your person. You need to go to somebody else. And I can make some recommendations.
I have too.
I love that. You've got another book coming. So the first book is, Coming to Harm Reduction, Kicking and Screaming. And I think everybody should get it, and we'll have a link for it. And you'll hear more details about Dee Dee's story on the way here.
Yeah. And my story's in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that you're working on a second book of stories, and hopefully that'll be out within the next year or so.
Yeah, probably end of 2022.
Okay.
What the goal?
What are you, whether it's coming out of COVID or just in this stage of a career, what are you excited about? What are the next few years holding for you in your professional development?
Oh gosh, I haven't been asked that in a while. COVID was such a interesting time, the last 14 months or so, because my business exploded literally last March. All hell broke loose. And it has been the craziest time in my career. And that's saying a lot after 33 years in this field. It was just so different, so crazy, busy, so up and down. So, people really struggling. And one of the things that I love doing these days is to do more family work. I've been working with families practically since the beginning of my career, but to focus on doing more what I call family coaching is really what I love doing, and using harm reduction as a model for that, helping families to get okay with what we were talking about in the beginning of that kid of theirs. Kid could be 12, could be 22, could be 52, doesn't matter, right? But smoking a little cannabis on the side, or maybe having a few beers on the weekend versus IV heroin use, or severe methamphetamine use, or some other things that they're doing, and helping them to see this is not a zero-sum game, or it doesn't have to be.
Doesn't have to be.
It's not black or white. We love our binaries so much in this country, and it's killing us. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
And besides that, we miss all the juicy bits, because it's the gray area that's all the juicy bits. That's where life happens.
So you're doing that with, we started doing that with families too. The only thing we're finding is one of the nuances that come up, and we won't have time to go into all of this, but maybe one little tidbit is, most families still believe in that idea of, well, no, it's, Melissa's sick. If you help Melissa, everything will be fine. And again, that's reinforced by the view of addiction that we have, right? Well, everybody else is fine and healthy. They just have a disease.
Right. I mean, I've been watching Gabor Mate's film today. I only had time to get the first half of it. And one of the things that I appreciate about his work is this idea of all of us, in some ways, having intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
And what we do with that. And the way that he talks about meeting someone with an addiction is to have the family essentially say thank you. You're the canary in the coal mine that is showing us our pain, our trauma that we've been carrying, that our predecessors carried, and goes on and on and on. Thank you for showing it to us. And now we all need to make some changes. And you know what? Even if you're not ready to stop your drug use, we're going to start making some changes on us and start some healing. And then maybe you can join us.
Man.
And I think,
powerful.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What would my life have been like had I heard that?
And
I don't do regrets, but just wondering, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do the family work, and sometimes I tell families I work with this, I don't go into the long history, but just say, I'm doing this work so that your family won't suffer like mine has, I hope.
Yeah, we were lucky. It's the struggles brought us together, but it was a nightmare along the way.
Yeah.
Dee Dee, you're amazing. You're always amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eddie.
And
back at you.
I can't wait to put this out and expose people to your work, and maybe get some families who need that help coming your way. And I hope that some of you listening right now are either struggling yourselves or know somebody who's struggling, can listen and understand that there's an entirely different way of talking about these things than the same old that's been presented to us for, close to 100 years now, and longer before that, because it's not like it was better before. It was even worse before. So here's to everybody finding what they need. Have an amazing weekend, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful, and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know.
by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.